Hi, I'm Rachel, and I'm about to tell you how the elite society of Manhattan forced me to clean toilets at their exclusive charity gala, treating me like hired help because of my simple appearance. They had no idea that my husband owned the very foundation hosting the event and controlled half the real estate empire their businesses depended on. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Sometimes life teaches you the most profound lessons in the most unexpected places. For me, that place was a glittering ballroom where I discovered that true power isn't about designer gowns or prestigious titles. It's about integrity, kindness, and how you treat people when you think nobody important is watching. What happened that night changed everything I thought I knew about human nature, and showed me that sometimes the most beautiful exteriors hide the ugliest souls. Let me take you back to 4 months ago, when everything started with what seemed like an innocent phone call. I was organizing my home office when my phone rang, displaying a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and distinctly upper class. "Good afternoon, this is Victoria Pemberton from the Pemberton Foundation. I'm calling to speak with Mrs. Rachel Henderson regarding the annual Diamond Hearts Charity Gala." I paused, confused. I'd never heard of the Pemberton Foundation, and I certainly hadn't applied to attend any charity gala. "I think there might be some mistake," I said politely. "I'm not familiar with your foundation." "Oh, no mistake at all," Victoria replied, her tone suggesting she was reading from a script. "Your husband, Daniel Henderson, is one of our major benefactors. We're extending a personal invitation for both of you to attend our most prestigious event of the year. It's being held at the Crystal Pavilion on Fifth Avenue." My heart skipped a beat. Daniel had mentioned making some charitable donations recently, but he'd been so busy with his business ventures that we rarely discussed the details. He traveled constantly for work, managing what I knew was a successful consulting firm, though he was always modest about his achievements. "That's very kind," I said, still processing the invitation. "When is the event?" "Next Friday evening. Black tie required, of course. The tickets are complimentary given your husband's generous contributions to our cause. We support underprivileged children's education programs throughout the city." After hanging up, I felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. A charity gala sounded wonderful, especially one supporting such an important cause. Daniel would be returning from a business trip to Singapore that morning, so I decided to surprise him with the news when he got home. The week flew by, in a whirlwind of anticipation. I spent hours researching the foundation online, reading about their impressive work in establishing learning centers and scholarship programs. The more I learned, the more honored I felt to be invited. These were people doing genuinely important work in the world. Daniel's reaction when I told him was interesting. He smiled, but I noticed a flicker of something in his eyes that I couldn't quite identify. "That sounds lovely, sweetheart," he said, pulling me into his arms. "It'll be nice to have an evening out together. Are you sure you're okay with going?" I asked, studying his expression. "You seem a little hesitant." "Not at all," he assured me, kissing my forehead. "I'm looking forward to it. Just make sure you wear something that makes you feel beautiful and confident." His words stayed with me as I stood in front of my closet the night before the gala. I owned exactly one formal dress, a simple black cocktail dress I'd bought for a friend's wedding 2 years earlier. It was elegant in its simplicity, well-made, and fit me perfectly. I paired it with my mother's vintage pearl earrings and a delicate silver bracelet Daniel had given me for our anniversary. Looking in the mirror, I felt good about my choice. The dress was timeless and appropriate, and the jewelry held sentimental value that made me feel confident. I wasn't trying to compete with anyone or make a statement about wealth. I simply wanted to look respectable while supporting a worthy cause. The morning of the gala, Daniel seemed unusually quiet during breakfast. He kept checking his phone and seemed distracted by something weighing on his mind. "Everything all right at work?" I asked, refilling his coffee cup. "Just the usual complications," he said, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "I might need to step out briefly during the event to handle a conference call with the London office. International business never sleeps." "Of course," I said, understanding how demanding his work could be. "I'll be fine mingling on my own for a while. The Crystal Pavilion was even more impressive than I'd imagined. Located in one of Manhattan's most exclusive districts, the building was a masterpiece of modern architecture, with soaring glass walls and crystal chandeliers that cast rainbow patterns across marble floors. Uniformed valets were taking keys from guests arriving in vehicles that cost more than most people's annual salaries. As our taxi pulled up to the entrance, I watched elegantly dressed women emerge from luxury cars, their gowns flowing like liquid silk, their jewelry catching the light from the building's facade. For a moment I felt a flutter of insecurity about my simple outfit, but I reminded myself that we were here to support children's education, not to participate in a fashion competition. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The registration table was staffed by 3 impeccably dressed women who looked like they'd stepped out of a high-end fashion magazine. The woman in the center, a statuesque blonde with perfectly styled hair and a smile that seemed practiced rather than genuine, checked her tablet as we approached. "Good evening," I said warmly. "Rachel and Daniel Henderson." The woman's fingers moved across her screen with practiced efficiency, but her expression shifted subtly as she located our information. Her eyes moved from the screen to take in my appearance, lingering on my dress and simple jewelry, with what I can only describe as barely concealed disdain. "Henderson," she repeated, her tone suggesting she was confirming something unpleasant. "Yes, here you are. I'm Priscilla Worthington, event coordinator." She handed us 2 badges with numbers on them. "You'll be at table 47. "Thank you," Daniel said, but I noticed his jaw had tightened slightly. "The cocktail reception is in the East Wing," Priscilla continued, her attention already shifting to the couple behind us who were clearly more worthy of her enthusiasm. "Dinner service begins at 8. We made our way through the lobby, passing groups of guests engaged in animated conversations about art acquisitions, vacation homes in the Hamptons, and business deals worth millions of dollars. The women were draped in designer gowns that probably cost more than my car, while the men wore suits that had clearly been tailored by the finest craftsmen money could buy. I began to understand that this wasn't just a charity gala. This was a gathering of Manhattan's social elite, where donations to worthy causes were secondary to networking opportunities and social positioning. The realization made me feel simultaneously out of place and more determined to focus on the event's charitable purpose. The cocktail reception was held in a breathtaking room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Servers in crisp uniforms circulated with champagne and elaborate canapes while guests clustered in small groups, their conversations a mixture of gossip, business dealings, and casual mentions of astronomical sums of money. Daniel excused himself to make his business call, leaving me to navigate the social landscape alone. I approached a group of women discussing the foundation's work, hoping to learn more about the programs we were supporting. "Excuse me," I said with a friendly smile. "I'd love to hear more about the scholarship program. It sounds like such important work." The conversation stopped abruptly. 4 pairs of eyes turned to examine me with the kind of scrutiny usually reserved for suspicious objects at airport security. The woman who had been speaking, a redhead in an emerald green gown that probably cost more than my monthly salary, looked me up and down with unconcealed skepticism. "And you are?" she asked, her tone suggesting I had interrupted something far more important than small talk. "Rachel Henderson," I replied, maintaining my smile despite the chilly reception. "My husband and I are here supporting the foundation." "Henderson," another woman repeated, a brunette whose diamond necklace caught the light every time she moved. "I don't recognize the name. Are you new to the foundation's circle?" "Yes, this is our first event," I admitted, beginning to sense that honesty might not be the best policy in this crowd. The women exchanged glances that spoke volumes. The redhead, who had introduced herself as Lydia Ashworth, smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes. "How refreshing to meet someone so authentic. Tell me, what does your husband do?" "He's in consulting," I said, keeping my answer simple as Daniel had always taught me to do when discussing his work. "Consulting?" Lydia repeated, her tone suggesting she'd tasted something unpleasant. "How wonderfully vague. And where did you find that charming dress? It has such a timeless quality." The other women tittered at what was clearly meant as an insult disguised as a compliment. I felt heat rise in my cheeks but kept my composure. "Thank you," I said simply, refusing to give them the satisfaction of knowing they'd struck a nerve. Before the conversation could become more uncomfortable, a server approached our group with a tray of champagne. As she offered glasses to the other women, Lydia waved her away dismissively. "Actually," Lydia said, her voice carrying a note of inspiration that made me deeply uneasy, "I think our new friend here might be more comfortable helping with the service rather than being served. After all, she seems more practically minded than the rest of us." The server, a young woman who looked barely out of college, shifted uncomfortably and glanced between Lydia and me with obvious confusion. "I'm sorry," I said, certain I had misunderstood. "Well, darling," Lydia continued, her smile becoming more predatory, "it's just that you seem so refreshingly down to earth. I'm sure you'd feel more at home working alongside the staff, rather than trying to pretend you belong with the donors." The cruelty of her suggestion hit me like a physical blow. She was essentially telling me that I looked like hired help rather than a guest. The other women watched the interaction with the kind of fascination people reserve for traffic accidents. Before I could respond, another voice joined the conversation. "Did I hear someone volunteering to help with the service? How wonderfully charitable." I turned to see a woman in her 50s approaching our group. She was impeccably dressed in a navy blue gown that screamed expensive taste, her silver hair styled in a way that suggested regular visits to Manhattan's most exclusive salons. Her presence seemed to command immediate attention from the other women. "Evelyn," Lydia said, her tone suddenly deferential. "We were just meeting Rachel Henderson." She was expressing interest in hands-on involvement with tonight's event. Evelyn Thornfield, as she introduced herself, looked me over with the kind of calculated assessment a jeweler might give a questionable gemstone. "How admirable," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "It's so rare to meet someone willing to roll up their sleeves and do real work." "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I began, but Evelyn cut me off with a raised hand. "Nonsense, dear. If you're truly committed to the Foundation's mission, then you won't mind contributing in whatever way you can, will you? After all, we can't all afford to simply write checks." The implication was clear and devastating. She was suggesting that Daniel and I couldn't afford to make significant donations and should therefore contribute through labor instead. The assumption was both insulting and completely wrong, but I found myself caught in a web of politeness and shock that prevented me from responding effectively. "I'm sure our catering staff would appreciate an extra pair of hands," Evelyn continued, her tone suggesting the matter was settled. "There's always cleaning to be done, especially in the restroom facilities. It's honest work, and every contribution matters." The group of women watched this exchange with barely concealed amusement, as if they were watching an entertaining show rather than witnessing someone's deliberate humiliation. I realized that this wasn't a spontaneous suggestion born from misunderstanding. This was a calculated effort to put me in what they considered my proper place. "I'm actually here as a guest," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "My husband made a significant donation to the Foundation." Lydia laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "Oh, sweetheart, anyone can claim their husband made a donation, but look around you. Do you really think you fit in here? Do you honestly believe you belong in the same room as people who donate hundreds of thousands of dollars to worthy causes?" I looked around the room at the glittering assembly of Manhattan's elite, their jewelry worth more than most people's homes, their casual conversations about million-dollar art purchases and European vacation homes. For a moment, I felt the weight of their judgment and the impossibility of defending myself without sounding desperate or dishonest. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Several other guests had begun to gather around our conversation, drawn by the entertainment value of watching someone being systematically humiliated. Phones were discreetly raised, capturing what they clearly expected to be a viral moment of social justice. Evelyn noticed my hesitation and pressed her advantage. "The restroom facilities are just down the hallway," she said, gesturing toward the back of the building. "I'm sure the staff will provide you with appropriate cleaning supplies. It's important work, maintaining proper hygiene standards for our guests." The circle of women closed tighter around me, their expressions ranging from amused anticipation to outright cruelty. I realized that refusing their suggestion would only escalate the situation and create an even bigger scene. But accepting it meant allowing them to reduce me to their personal entertainment. "I think I'll wait for my husband to return," I said, trying to buy time and hoping Daniel would appear to rescue me from this nightmare. "Oh, but the restrooms need attention now," Evelyn insisted, her voice taking on a harder edge. "Surely a few minutes of honest work won't hurt you. Unless, of course, you consider yourself too good for such tasks." The trap was perfectly set. If I refused, I would be branded as arrogant and pretentious. If I agreed, I would be publicly humiliated and reduced to a source of entertainment for their twisted amusement. Either way, they would have their victory. I looked around desperately for any sign of Daniel, but he was nowhere to be seen. The crowd around me had grown larger, and I could hear whispered commentary about the scene unfolding. Some guests were openly recording now, their phones held high to capture every moment of my humiliation. That's when a server appeared at my elbow, a young man who looked as uncomfortable as I felt. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "Mrs. Thornfield asked me to show you to the supply closet." The moment of truth had arrived. I could feel the weight of dozens of eyes upon me, waiting to see how I would respond to this ultimate test of my character and dignity. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity as I stood there, surrounded by Manhattan's elite, their expectant faces waiting for my response. The young server shifted nervously beside me, clearly uncomfortable with being part of this orchestrated humiliation. I could feel my heart pounding, but something deep inside me refused to break. "You know what?" I said, my voice clearer and stronger than I expected. "I'd be happy to help." The surprise on their faces was immediate and unmistakable. They had expected me to either flee in embarrassment or argue defensively. Instead, I had accepted their challenge with grace, and it clearly wasn't the reaction they had anticipated. Evelyn's smile faltered slightly. "Wonderful," she said, though her tone suggested anything but pleasure. "How refreshingly practical of you." As I followed the server toward the back of the building, I heard Lydia's voice behind me, no longer bothering to whisper. "Well, that was easier than expected. Some people really do know their place." The laughter that followed stung, but I kept walking with my head held high. What they didn't understand was that I had grown up in a household where honest work was never something to be ashamed of. My grandmother had cleaned houses to put my mother through college, and my mother had worked double shifts as a nurse to ensure I had every opportunity she could provide. Hard work wasn't beneath me, it was part of my foundation. The supply closet was located in a service corridor that clearly wasn't meant for guest access. The server, who introduced himself as Marcus, looked genuinely apologetic as he handed me cleaning supplies and showed me to the guest restrooms. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I've been working these events for 3 years and I've never seen anything like what just happened." Those women were completely out of line. "Thank you, Marcus," I replied, genuinely touched by his kindness. But sometimes people reveal their true character when they think no one important is watching. "You don't have to do this," he continued. "I could tell them you're feeling unwell or something." I considered his offer for a moment, then shook my head. "No, but I appreciate your concern. Sometimes the best way to handle bullies is to show them that their cruelty can't diminish your dignity." As I began cleaning the elegant marble restrooms, I found myself thinking about the lessons my mother had taught me. She always said that character isn't revealed in moments of comfort, but in how you respond when life tests your resolve. These women thought they were humiliating me, but instead they were giving me an opportunity to demonstrate something they clearly didn't understand. True strength comes from within, not from external validation. The restrooms at the Crystal Pavilion were works of art in themselves, with imported marble, gold-plated fixtures, and crystal accents that probably cost more than most people's cars. As I worked, I couldn't help but think about the irony of the situation. Here I was, cleaning toilets at a charity gala meant to help underprivileged children, while the donors outside were more concerned with social status than actual charity. About 20 minutes into my unexpected janitorial duties, I heard the restroom door open. I looked up to see a woman in her 70s entering, elegantly dressed but with kind eyes that reminded me of my grandmother. "Oh my," she said, noticing me with the cleaning supplies. "Are you with the venue staff, dear?" "Not exactly," I replied, continuing to polish the marble countertop. "I'm Rachel Henderson. I'm here as a guest, but I volunteered to help with some cleaning. The woman's eyebrows rose in surprise. Volunteered? That's quite unusual for this crowd. I'm Dorothy Pemberton, by the way. This is my foundation's event. I nearly dropped the cleaning cloth. Dorothy Pemberton was the founder of the organization we were supposedly here to support. The realization that I was meeting her while scrubbing restrooms would have been mortifying if not for her genuinely warm demeanor. Mrs. Pemberton, I said, straightening up, it's an honor to meet you. Your foundation does incredible work. Thank you, dear. But please, call me Dorothy. And might I ask how you came to be cleaning restrooms at your own charitable event? I hesitated, unsure how to explain the situation without sounding like I was complaining or seeking sympathy. Some of the other guests suggested that I might be more comfortable contributing through service rather than other means. Dorothy's expression shifted, her kind eyes hardening with understanding. I see. And these guests felt qualified to make that determination based on what, exactly? Apparently, my appearance suggested that I wasn't quite at their social level. I admitted, feeling foolish for allowing myself to be manipulated into this situation. Your appearance, Dorothy repeated slowly, her voice taking on an edge that suggested decades of experience dealing with exactly this type of social cruelty. Tell me, Rachel, what does your husband do for work? He's in consulting, I replied, sticking to the simple answer Daniel had taught me to use. Dorothy studied my face carefully, and I had the distinct impression she was evaluating something far more complex than my husband's profession. Henderson, she mused. Daniel Henderson, by any chance? Yes, I said, surprised by her recognition of his name. Do you know him? A slow smile spread across Dorothy's face, but it wasn't entirely pleasant. Oh, my dear child, I know your husband very well indeed. In fact, he's the single largest benefactor our foundation has ever had. His donations have funded 3 entire learning centers and dozens of scholarship programs. The cleaning cloth slipped from my hands as the implications of her words sank in. Daniel wasn't just a donor, he was apparently the foundation's primary supporter, which meant that the women who had sent me to clean toilets had just humiliated the wife of their most important benefactor. I think, Dorothy continued, her voice carrying a note of steel beneath its grandmotherly warmth, that there are some people outside who need to learn a very important lesson about making assumptions. Before I could respond, the restroom door opened again and Marcus peeked in nervously. Mrs. Pemberton, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's been some kind of commotion in the main hall. Something about Mr. Henderson. Dorothy and I exchanged glances, and I felt my stomach drop. Whatever was happening in the main hall involved Daniel, and given the evening's events so far, I suspected it wasn't good news for the women who had orchestrated my humiliation. We should go, Dorothy said, her tone suggesting this was less a suggestion than a command. I think it's time for some people to meet the real Daniel Henderson. As we walked back toward the main hall, Dorothy explained what I hadn't understood about my husband's involvement with the foundation. Your husband doesn't just donate money, Rachel. He owns the consulting firm that manages our investments, the real estate company that secured our building leases, and the financial services company that handles our international transfers. Without Daniel Henderson's business empire, the Pemberton Foundation simply wouldn't exist. I felt like I was learning about a completely different person than the modest, hard-working man I'd married. Daniel had always been private about his business dealings, describing himself simply as a consultant and downplaying his success. I knew he was comfortable financially, but I had no idea about the true scope of his influence. He never told me, I said, struggling to process this information. That's because your husband is a genuinely humble man, Dorothy replied. Unlike the vultures circling tonight's event, Daniel doesn't need to advertise his wealth or influence. He prefers to let his actions speak for themselves. As we approached the main hall, I could hear raised voices and what sounded like a heated argument. The crowd that had been mingling casually earlier was now clustered around something happening near the registration table, their attention focused on what was clearly an unfolding drama. Rachel! Daniel's voice cut through the noise as he spotted me emerging from the service corridor. He was standing near the registration table, and I could see immediately that something had changed about his demeanor. The quiet, modest man I knew was still there, but there was an authority in his posture that I'd never witnessed before. He moved through the crowd toward me, and I noticed that people stepped aside for him automatically, the way they might for a celebrity or important official. When he reached me, his eyes quickly took in my appearance, the cleaning supplies I was still carrying, and Dorothy's presence beside me. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle when speaking to me, but carrying an undertone of controlled anger that made me realize he already knew what had happened. "I'm fine," I said, though I could hear the uncertainty in my own voice. "Daniel, I had no idea about your involvement with the foundation. We'll talk about that later," he said, his attention shifting to scan the crowd that had gathered around us. "Right now, I think some people owe you an apology." That's when I noticed Evelyn Thornfield pushing through the crowd, her earlier confidence replaced by something that looked suspiciously like panic. Behind her came Lydia and the other women who had participated in my humiliation, their expressions ranging from confusion to dawning horror as they began to understand what was happening. "Mr. Henderson," Evelyn said, her voice artificially bright but clearly strained. "What a pleasure to finally meet you in person. I'm Evelyn Thornfield. We've corresponded about your generous donations." Daniel's expression remained neutral, but I could see the ice in his eyes. "Mrs. Thornfield, yes, I believe you've met my wife, Rachel." The color drained from Evelyn's face as she looked between Daniel and me, clearly trying to calculate how badly she had miscalculated the situation. "Your wife? But I thought—" "She said she was Rachel Henderson, but I didn't realize—" "You didn't realize what?" Daniel asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "That someone could be my wife without wearing a designer gown? That a person's worth isn't determined by their jewelry or their accent?" Lydia stepped forward, clearly trying to salvage the situation. "Mr. Henderson, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We were simply trying to help your wife feel more comfortable by suggesting she might enjoy participating in the service aspect of tonight's event." The laugh that escaped from Daniel was cold and humorless. "Is that what you call forcing someone to clean toilets? Helping them feel comfortable?" A murmur ran through the crowd as people began to understand what had transpired. I could see phones being raised again, but this time the recording seemed to favor a different outcome than what the earlier audience had expected. Dorothy stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think this is an excellent opportunity to discuss the true meaning of charity and service." The crowd quieted, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Dorothy's presence commanded respect in a way that had nothing to do with wealth or status, and everything to do with genuine accomplishment and moral authority. "Tonight, you've witnessed something that should shame every person in this room," Dorothy continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "A woman was judged, humiliated, and degraded based solely on her appearance and perceived social status. She was forced to perform menial labor as entertainment for people who claim to support charitable causes." Evelyn tried to interrupt, but Dorothy silenced her with a look that could have frozen fire. "But here's what you don't understand," Dorothy continued. "That woman responded to your cruelty with grace, dignity, and genuine humility. She didn't argue, she didn't make excuses, and she didn't try to use her husband's influence to avoid your petty punishment. She simply accepted your challenge and maintained her integrity throughout your attempt to break her spirit." I felt tears threatening as Dorothy's words validated everything I had been feeling. The evening's events had been designed to humiliate me, but somehow I had emerged with my dignity intact. Daniel moved closer to me, his arms settling protectively around my shoulders. "My wife," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent room, "is worth more than everyone in this room combined. Not because of money or status, but because of her character. Tonight, you've shown her exactly who you really are beneath your expensive clothes and charitable pretenses." "Now," Dorothy said, her tone becoming businesslike, "I think it's time for some consequences. Mr. Henderson, as the Foundation's primary benefactor, I believe you have some decisions to make about our future operations." Daniel nodded, his expression serious. "I do indeed. Effective immediately, I'm restructuring my support for the Pemberton Foundation. Future events will be managed by organizations that understand the difference between charity and social theater." Evelyn looked like she might faint. "Mr. Henderson, surely we can resolve this misunderstanding. Perhaps we could discuss this privately." "There's nothing to discuss," Daniel replied. "You've shown me everything I need to know about your character and your organization's values. My business relationships will reflect those observations." As we prepared to leave, I realized that the evening had taught me something profound about both my husband and myself. Daniel's wealth and influence were impressive, but what mattered most was how he used that power to protect and defend the people he loved. And I had discovered a strength within myself that I hadn't known existed. The crowd parted as we walked toward the exit, Dorothy accompanying us with the dignity of someone who had just delivered a masterclass in moral authority. Behind us, I could hear frantic whispers and what sounded like damage control conversations, but I no longer cared about their opinions or their social games. "I'm proud of you," Daniel said quietly as we waited for our car. "What you did tonight took real courage." "What I did was clean some toilets," I replied, but I was smiling. "No," he said, stopping to face me. "What you did was show a room full of people what real class looks like. You maintained your dignity when they tried to strip it away, and you proved that true worth has nothing to do with external appearances." As our car pulled away from the Crystal Pavilion, I reflected on the evening's events. I had gone to a charity gala, expecting to support a worthy cause and meet new people. Instead, I had encountered the worst of human nature and discovered reserves of strength I didn't know I possessed. Most importantly, I had learned that my husband's true wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in his commitment to justice and his protection of the people he loved. The real tragedy wasn't what had happened to me, but what those women had revealed about themselves. In their eagerness to humiliate someone they perceived as beneath them, they had exposed the poverty of their own souls and destroyed relationships that could never be repaired. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't retaliation, but simply refusing to let cruelty diminish your spirit. And sometimes the greatest victory is walking away with your integrity intact, knowing that you've risen above the petty malice of people who mistake wealth for worth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.